A young nurse rescues drowning twin girls in a river. Unaware their dad is a lonely billionaire in search of true love. The morning was cold and peaceful when Lila got off her shift. The rain had come down hard in the early hours, leaving the ground wet and the air thick with the clean scent of damp earth and wildflowers. She didn't crave much, only rest, a good book, and the occasional stillness the forest offered. But little did she know, the events that would unfold that morning would change the course of her life forever. The countryside river ran fast after the rain, swollen and deceptively calm, the kind of current that hid its strength beneath a glassy surface. She was nearing the old wooden footbridge when something pierced the serenity, a faint, frantic cry. She froze. Then came another, sharper, urgent. Lila ripped the earbuds out and looked around. Her nurse's instincts surged to life, adrenaline sharpening every sound. It wasn't just a bird or an echo, it was a scream. Small, desperate, a child. She broke into a sprint, her boots thudding against wet soil as she veered off the path and through the trees, heart pounding against her ribs. As she broke through the final brush, her eyes locked on the source. Two little girls, twins, were clinging to a splintered branch jutting out from the riverbank. Their matching pink raincoats clung to their soaked bodies as the current pulled at them violently. One of them screamed again, her voice hoarse, her tiny hand slipping. Lila didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She threw off her jacket, kicked off her shoes, and dove headfirst into the river. The cold was like knives. It knocked the air from her lungs, the strength from her arms, but she swam anyway. Her body moved on instinct, slicing through the current. First to the girl nearest the branch, whose hand had just let go. Lila reached her, wrapping an arm around her waist and kicking hard to stay afloat. The child sobbed against her shoulder. Lila whispered steady reassurances through chattering teeth. The second girl was slipping too. The branch cracked under her weight. With a burst of strength, Lila pushed through the torrent, grabbed the child's arm, and pulled her free just as the branch snapped and vanished downstream. Kicking hard, she made for the shore, her muscles screaming. Every stroke felt slower, heavier. The river fought her, but she refused to let go. Finally, her feet found the muddy edge. She dragged both girls onto the bank, collapsing beside them, chest heaving, trembling with exhaustion. The girls were coughing, crying, but they were alive. That was when she heard him. A voice, shouting. A man burst through the undergrowth, mud streaked on his pants, his coat half-buttoned. Panic carved lines across his handsome, disheveled face. When he saw the girls, his legs buckled, and he dropped beside them, scooping them into his arms. "Oh God," he choked. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" One of the girls threw her arms around his neck, sobbing into his coat. The other reached for her sister. He clutched them both like he'd nearly lost his soul. "I only turned for a minute," he said breathlessly to Lila. "They were playing by the edge while I answered a work call. I should never have looked away." His voice cracked on the last word. Lila sat up, soaked to the bone, hair plastered to her cheeks, her breath still catching. She offered a small, tired smile. "They're okay now. That's what matters." Their eyes met for the first time. He didn't speak, just stared at her, eyes filled with something more than gratitude. Awe, maybe, or something deeper. She thought nothing of it. Just a grateful father. Another day, another emergency. But Damien Vale would never forget her face. He watched her from his study that evening. Not directly, of course. Just the memory of her, etched in his mind like a watermark he couldn't shake. Damien was a man people only knew by whispers, a billionaire recluse, single father, CEO of a quiet tech empire. Since losing his wife 3 years ago, he had withdrawn from the spotlight entirely, focusing on raising his daughters and building a safe, controlled world around them. There were cameras, bodyguards, private tutors. But that morning, on the one day he had lowered his guard, nearly everything had shattered. And a stranger, a nurse, had saved his world. He remembered her soaked frame kneeling in the mud, not asking for praise, not even staying long enough to be thanked properly. She'd walked away once the girls were safe, her clothes dripping and her voice gentle. He hadn't even caught her full name. Just Lila. That night, he couldn't sleep. The girls had nightmares. He stayed up holding them, whispering promises of safety, thinking all the while of the woman who had pulled them from death with her bare hands. Damien had spent years thinking love was a chapter closed to him. But something about Lila had stirred the dust. She had been fearless, not because she had something to prove, but because she simply couldn't stand by and do nothing. He made a quiet decision. He would find her. Not to reward her with money, not to parade her in the press. He would find her because something inside him had shifted, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Lila didn't expect to see him again. That river moment, for her, had been just another page in the book of unspoken sacrifices. Nurses knew such pages well, things you did not for applause, but because it was right. The morning sun poured over the hills of the quiet town like honey, casting long, sleepy shadows across its narrow streets. At the edge of town, nestled beside a meadow speckled with wildflowers, the small-town clinic stirred to life with the rhythm of another day. Inside, Nurse Lila moved between exam rooms and the front desk with practiced calm. She'd been working since dawn, and though fatigue clung to her bones, she didn't mind. The clinic was her second home, a place where she could give something that mattered. Her shift was winding down. The last patient had gone, and she was finishing notes when she heard the unmistakable purr of an expensive engine, low, smooth, out of place. Through the wide front windows, she saw it, a sleek black SUV pulling into the gravel lot, its surface gleaming like what obsidian in the afternoon sun. The tinted windows gave nothing away. Lila paused mid-sentence, the pen in her hand hovering. The door opened. And there he was, Damien Vale. He stepped out slowly, dressed in a dark overcoat, the kind that fit him too well to be casual. But it wasn't the coat that caught her attention. It was the way he held the small hands of his daughters, one on either side, like they were lifelines, like they were the only thing anchoring him to the ground. Lila stood instinctively as the trio approached. Her heart picked up pace, not out of fear, but out of something quieter, deeper. A ripple of anticipation she didn't quite understand. "Hi," Damien said simply, voice gentle, low. Before Lila could reply, the twins rushed forward with tiny feet pattering against the linoleum. They wrapped their arms around her in a chaotic, giggling hug. "You saved us," one of them chirped. "You're like a hero," the other said, eyes wide with sincerity. Lila laughed softly, kneeling to their level. "I think you two were pretty brave yourselves." They held her longer than she expected, warm and familiar, like she belonged in their lives already. When they finally stepped back, Damien came forward and held out a small envelope. His eyes searched hers, not bold, not expectant, just present. "It's from them," he said, almost apologetically. Lila took the card. It was hand-folded from pink construction paper, crayon drawings all over it. Inside were the scrawled words of two little girls who didn't understand the word "thank you" could never really be enough. But somehow, in their scribbled hearts and lopsided rainbows, it was. She smiled. A true, unguarded smile. "They're sweet," she said. "They are," Damien replied, watching them now as they twirled around one another. "They haven't stopped talking about you since that day." Lila didn't quite know what to say to that. She wasn't used to being remembered. Most people thanked her and forgot her name by the end of the week. She turned back to him. "I'm glad they're okay. You saved them," he said. "There's no other way to put it." She looked down, embarrassed. "It's what anyone would have done." "No," he said quietly, "it's not." There was no boast in his voice, no romantic overture, just quiet gratitude. And something else, something in his eyes that didn't match the suit, the car, or the legacy of wealth that followed him like a shadow. Something vulnerable, something searching. Lila nodded, slipping the card into her coat pocket. "I thought I'd just say thank you in person," Damien said, sensing her modesty. "I didn't want it to be transactional." Her eyes flicked toward him. "You mean no check in the mail?" He smiled, and it was softer than she expected. "No check. Just this." Lila tilted her head. "That's rare. I don't do things like this," he admitted. But then again, not many people dive into a river to save two kids they don't know. There was a pause. He seemed like he might say something else. But he didn't. Instead, he looked at her for a moment longer. Looked at her in a way that made her stomach feel strange, like standing on the edge of something tall and thrilling. Then he turned. "Come on, girls," he called, and the twins obediently took his hands again. As they reached the SUV, one of them turned and waved. Lila waved back, heart still steadying from the unexpected rhythm he had left behind. Then he was gone. That night, Lila sat in her kitchen, the soft hum of the kettle the only sound. The apartment was small but warm. A bookshelf lined the wall above her couch, crammed with worn paperbacks and one ceramic angel her late mother had given her years ago. She took the pink card from her coat pocket, opened it again, and smiled at the sight of the lopsided hearts. But her thoughts weren't on the drawings, they were on the man. Damien Vale. She'd heard the name whispered by nurses in the staff room once or twice. Billionaire. Widower. Tech mogul gone reclusive. Nobody really knew what he did or why he kept to himself. But now she had seen him up close. He wasn't what she imagined. There was sadness in him, but strength too. And not the kind that came from boardrooms or power. She thought of the way he looked at her. The way he hadn't tried to impress her. He had shown up just to say thank you. Not to fix things. Not to make her feel like a story in a magazine. It was simple, and it stayed with her. Days passed. Then a week. She didn't expect to see him again. But he returned. On a Friday morning, she stepped out of the clinic for a quick walk before her shift, and there he was, standing across the street with 2 cups of coffee. He looked almost sheepish. I wasn't sure how you take it. Lila raised an eyebrow, amused. You stock all your heroes with cappuccinos? Only the ones who pull my children out of rivers, he replied. She smiled. Couldn't help it. Lucky for me, then. They sat on the bench in front of the flower shop. Talked. Nothing deep at first. Just work, weather, the occasional disaster patients create without realizing it. But the conversation didn't stall. It moved easily, like they had known each other in some former life. He told her about how he worked remotely now, how he had stepped back from his company after his wife's death, choosing instead to raise the girls away from the noise of the world. They're my anchor, he said. But some days, I forget how to be more than a father. Lila nodded slowly. You're allowed to be more than one thing. What about you? He asked. I'm a nurse, she said. Daughter of a woman who worked 3 jobs. Lover of quiet walks. Avoider of drama. He chuckled. Sounds like you're good at staying grounded. She looked at him then, something quiet behind her gaze. It's safer that way. And he understood. He didn't push. Over the next few weeks, Damien found reasons to visit. Sometimes with the girls. Sometimes just passing by. And Lila, who had spent years building a life free of chaos and complication, found herself waiting for the sound of tires on gravel, for the deep, familiar hum of his voice when he greeted her. They weren't dating. Not exactly. There were no declarations, no flirtations. Just 2 people brushing the edges of something they didn't quite name. But the moments mattered. Moments like the one where he brought her a book she'd once mentioned loving. Or the time he stayed with her outside the clinic during a blackout, watching stars bloom over the hills. She learned how he liked his coffee black, no sugar. He learned she always hummed when she read. One afternoon, the girls ran ahead of him and hugged Lila tightly. Are you going to be our friend forever? One of them asked. Lila blinked, surprised. Before she could answer, Damien appeared, eyes warm. We hope so, he said. Lila looked at him, caught between her instinct to run from anything too good and her desire to stay. It scared her, but she stayed. That night, Lila stood again by the river where it all began. The current had slowed. The sky overhead was streaked with gold and soft blue. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. She didn't know what Damien would mean in her life 5 months from now, or 5 years. She didn't know if he would become her future or remain just a part of her story. But she knew this. Sometimes the river doesn't just carry danger. Sometimes it carries you to something new. The rain came in sheets, thick, silvery ropes that blurred the world into watercolor. The sky had turned the color of smoke by mid-afternoon, and thunder rolled in slow, low murmurs above the hills. The clinic lights flickered once, briefly threatened by the storm, but held steady. Lila stood beneath the narrow awning at the front of the building, her arms crossed, her scrubs damp around the edges. Her shift had ended 15 minutes ago, but the storm had arrived fast and fierce, leaving her stranded without an umbrella. She didn't mind the rain, she had always liked it, actually, but not when it was this angry. Her backpack hung loosely from one shoulder. Raindrops hit the parking lot in loud splashes, bouncing off the pavement like skipping stones. Across the street, the wind nudged a forgotten newspaper into the gutter, and tree branches bowed and hissed. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound wash over her. Then a sound cut through the downpour, the smooth hum of a well-tuned engine. Lila opened her eyes as a familiar black SUV slowed to a stop just in front of the clinic. The windows were fogged at the edges, the wipers ticking back and forth like a metronome. The driver's door opened. Damien stepped out, quickly circling the vehicle to the passenger's side. He opened the back door, reached in, and emerged with 2 coffee cups and a cardboard tray. He moved with careful intention, shielding them from the rain as best he could. His coat was already speckled with water by the time he reached her. "I was nearby," he said, as though it needed explaining. Lila arched a brow. "In this weather?" He offered the coffee with a quiet, hopeful smile. "Thought maybe you'd still be here." "Figured. Worst case, I drink 2 cups myself." She took one of the cups, her fingers brushing his. "Best case?" she asked. "We drink them together." Lila hesitated for a second, then nodded toward the small wooden bench beneath the overhang. They sat down in silence at first, each sipping cautiously, warming their hands around the cups. Rain painted the world around them in soft, constant rhythm, like a lullaby for the weary. She glanced at him. He wasn't the man she had first imagined, the elusive tech billionaire people gossiped about in whispers. Sitting beside her now, Damien Vale looked like any other tired parent. His suit jacket was slightly rumpled, his hair damp at the temples. There were faint shadows under his eyes. But there was also something steady in his gaze, an honesty that made her feel like she didn't need to be anyone but herself. "I don't really do this," he said after a while. She looked at him. "Coffee?" He smiled faintly. "No. Sitting in the rain with a woman I barely know. Talking. You could have just sent another thank you card," she teased. "I thought about it," he admitted. "But I wanted to see you again." Lila stared down at the ripples in her coffee. Her voice was quiet. "I'm not used to being seen." He turned his head. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "I've been a nurse for 6 years. I'm good at it. But people don't remember the person under the uniform. They remember the prescription you gave them, or the way you cleaned a wound. But not you. Not your name. Not your face." "I remembered your name," he said. She glanced at him. "Because I pulled your daughters from a river." "Maybe," Damien said, his tone softer now. "But maybe also because you didn't ask for anything afterward." Lila tilted her head slightly. "Was I supposed to?" He smiled. "Most people would have." They sat quietly again, letting the silence settle comfortably between them. Thunder cracked in the distance. The wind softened. The rain, too, began to ease, shifting from a downpour to a steady drizzle. Lila pulled her jacket closer around her shoulders. "My mom taught me to swim, you know." He looked over. She said it was one of those things every woman should know. How to cook rice, how to patch a tire, and how to swim in case the world tries to drown you. Smart woman. She was. Lila's smile faded, nostalgic. She worked nights at the diner, and in the summer, we'd go to the lake on her one day off. She taught me how to float first. Said surviving is just learning how to keep your head above water, even if the current is strong. Damien's eyes softened. "You talk about her like she's still here." "She is," Lila said, touching her heart. "Just not physically." He nodded, understanding etched deep in the quiet of his expression. "I stay up most nights," he said, voice lower now. "Not working. Just watching the girls sleep." She looked at him, the vulnerability in his confession landing heavy. "I keep wondering if I'm doing it right. If I'm being too protective. Or not enough. If I'm giving them a good life. Or just a safe one." "You love them," Lila said, simply. "Is that enough?" "It's the most important part." Damien took a slow breath, letting it sit in his chest for a moment. "When their mother died, I told myself I'd build them a world where nothing could touch them. But the truth is, no amount of money, no amount of planning, ever makes you ready for how fragile it all is." Lila nodded slowly. "Life doesn't wait for you to be ready." The rain had mostly stopped now, the last few drops tapping rhythmically on the awning above. The smell of wet earth filled the air, clean, green, alive. Damien looked at her again. Not in the way men sometimes do. Not in the way that asks or demands. But in the way someone looks when they've just realized they've found something rare. A person who listens. A person who sees. Lila stood, brushing a few stray drops from her coat. "Thank you for the coffee." He rose with her, cup still in hand. "I could pretend it was just about the coffee. But it wasn't," she said. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She took a few steps toward the sidewalk, then paused. "You're doing better than you think," she said, without turning around. His voice caught slightly. "How do you know?" She looked over her shoulder. "Because they still run toward you, not away." And with that, she walked off into the soft mist of what remained of the storm. Damien stood there for a long time after she was gone, coffee growing cold in his hand, heart flickering with something unfamiliar. It wasn't longing. Not exactly. It was hope. Hope that maybe, in a world that had taken so much from both of them, something unexpected could still be given. Something real. The days grew longer, golden with late spring light, and the rain that once soaked the earth gave way to warmth and blossoms. In the quiet town nestled between rivers and woods, weeks slipped by like pages in a book, gentle, almost unnoticed. But something was shifting. Lila didn't mark the change with dates or milestones. She felt it in the rhythm of her days. It started with small things, Damien and the girls showing up at the clinic with a thermos of homemade soup and a shy smile from each child. Lila had been at her desk, head in paperwork, when the door creaked open. Two tiny voices called her name. She looked up to see the twins bundled in rain jackets, proudly holding out the steaming container. Damien stood behind them, holding their backpacks and looking sheepish. "We thought you might have skipped lunch again," he said. Lila smiled, heartwarming in ways she didn't fully understand. She thanked them and sat with the girls on the clinic porch, sharing soup and stories while Damien leaned quietly against the post, listening. It wasn't a grand gesture, and that was what made it mean more. Over time, there were more visits. An invitation to a picnic at the quiet edge of the meadow behind Damien's estate. He'd packed sandwiches and lemonade, and the girls brought a basket of wildflowers. Lila arrived with her hair braided and bare feet in the grass. She taught the twins how to weave flower crowns and laughed when they clumsily tried to copy her hands. Damien watched from a distance at first, sitting with his coffee, smiling quietly. But eventually he joined them, letting the girls place crooked daisies in his hair as they giggled like wild birds. One afternoon, he appeared at her cottage with a toolkit in hand. "You mentioned your railing was loose," he said, standing on her porch in a faded shirt and jeans that surprised her. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you say." She let him in. They worked side by side, and though the repair was simple, they lingered on the porch afterward, drinking iced tea in the soft shade. They didn't talk about money. They didn't talk about the past. They just talked. Lila told him about growing up with her mother, about learning to patch walls and chase leaks with nothing but determination and duct tape. Damien shared stories of the early days, building his company from a rented garage, the sleepless nights, the deals that nearly broke him. But he never bragged. Not once. He spoke like a man who had seen the top and still missed the bottom. And Lila listened, not because of who he was, but because of how he spoke. He wasn't a billionaire in those moments. He was a man afraid of being alone. A man trying to figure out what kind of life was left for him now. Their connection deepened in the silence between conversations, in shared glances when the girls danced barefoot through a sprinkler, in small smiles exchanged across a kitchen table while folding tiny socks and peeling apples. Damien started to laugh more. His shoulders softened. The lines at the corners of his eyes no longer looked tired, they looked lived in. One evening, they gathered in the backyard behind his house. A small fire pit crackled as the sun dipped below the trees. The girls roasted marshmallows, their cheeks sticky and pink from the heat. Lila sat between them on a wide blanket, her fingers absently brushing tangles from their hair. Damien watched from his chair a few feet away, his elbows resting on his knees, a quiet drink in his hand. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The scene in front of him was enough. Lila, glowing in the firelight. His daughters curled into her sides like they'd belonged there all along. The laughter faded into yawns, and eventually, both girls dozed off. One in Lila's lap, the other with her head on her shoulder. Lila didn't move. She just looked up at him, her eyes wide, soft, unsure. And Damien felt it. That invisible thread between them growing taut with meaning. He didn't say a word, but something shifted in the air. It wasn't gratitude anymore. It wasn't coincidence or timing or debt. It was real. Something that came not from crisis, but from the quiet hours that followed. Something made of shared moments, of vulnerability freely offered and carefully received. He stood slowly, walked over, and draped a blanket around her shoulders. She looked up, a breath catching in her throat, not because of what he did, but how he did it. With care, with gentleness, with a reverence she hadn't felt in years. The fire crackled, casting shadows across their faces. The girl shifted slightly, nestling deeper into her warmth. "I don't remember the last time I saw them sleep like that," he whispered. Lila looked down at them. "They feel safe. Because of you." She shook her head. "Because of us." He stood there for a while, not touching her, not asking anything of her, just letting the moment settle. And that was when Lila knew. This was no longer about a river or a rescue, no longer about fate or obligation. This was something that had bloomed slowly, like wildflowers between stones. Something that asked for no permission, no explanation. A connection, honest, unpolished, and deeply real. And somewhere in her chest, something quietly bloomed. Hope. The mornings were getting colder, the days shorter. Lila began to feel a weight settling on her chest, a heaviness she couldn't shake. The life she'd been slipping into with Damien, with his daughters, seemed to pull her in further with each passing day. She'd felt it the first time she saw them all together, the way they belonged to a world she wasn't sure she was a part of. A world of wealth, of mansions, and of expectations that felt too foreign, too far out of reach. It was on a quiet afternoon, as the leaves swirled outside her small cottage window, that she finally said the words. The words she hadn't wanted to say, but that had been growing inside her for weeks. "I need space," she told Damien over the phone. "I can't keep doing this." Her voice shook, but she was resolute. There was silence on the other end, thick and heavy. She imagined his face, how it must have fallen, how his expression must have crumbled, and that thought made her heart ache even more. But she pushed it down. It was the only way. You're not saying goodbye, are you?" His voice was tight, strained. "I don't know," Lila whispered. "I just need to think. I don't belong there. With you. With your life." "I won't argue," he said quietly. "Take all the space you need. I'll be here if you want to talk." And just like that, the connection that had felt so steady, so sure, began to loosen, slipping away like sand through fingers. The next few days felt like empty hours, each one dragging as Lila tried to focus on her work at the clinic. She went through the motions, taking blood pressure readings, administering shots, holding children's hands, but something inside her felt hollow, like a part of her had been taken away. She missed Damien's presence, his soft smiles, the way his daughters' laughter filled the air when they visited her. But she couldn't admit it. She couldn't make herself feel like she belonged in that world, even though a part of her wanted to. In Damien's world, the silence was even more deafening. The mansion that once felt like a safe haven now felt like a cage. He wandered its vast hallways, empty and cold without the sound of laughter, without Lila's voice. He hadn't called her, hadn't reached out, respecting her wishes, but it tore at him in ways he couldn't explain. Every corner of the house felt like a reminder of her absence. The twins' laughter no longer echoed through the rooms, and the warmth that once filled their home seemed to be evaporating. One evening, as he sat in the study, a small, crumpled piece of paper caught his eye on the coffee table. It was a drawing, one of the twins' creations, their innocent scribbles filling the page. Damien picked it up with trembling hands. It was a picture of him, of his daughters, and of Lila, her arms around them, all of them smiling, glowing with happiness. In the drawing, Lila wasn't a nurse, wasn't a stranger, she was a part of their family. The realization hit him like a wave crashing over him, filling his chest with a pain so sharp, so unbearable, that he could barely breathe. He knew, then, what he had to do. If he wanted love, real love, the kind that wasn't tied to wealth or appearances, he had to fight for it. He had to fight for her. He couldn't just let her slip away because he was too afraid of what that world might look like for her. He couldn't let the distance grow between them, not when they had something real. Damien stood up, the drawing still clutched in his hand. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to lose her. Not like this. And so, as the nights grew colder, as the air thickened with the tension of unspoken words, both of them, though miles apart, knew something deep in their hearts. This distance was not the end. It was just the beginning of something they both needed to fight for. The sun had barely kissed the earth when Lila arrived at the clinic that morning. The air was still cool, crisp with the faintest hint of autumn. She thought it would be just another busy day. Another day of charting records, of checking on patients, of quietly doing the work that had been her life for years. But as she rounded the corner, her heart skipped a beat. There, standing in the early morning light, was Damien. He was leaning against the stone wall of the clinic, a small paper bag cradled in his hands. She had expected to see him in one of his tailored suits, his usual polished self. But today, he was simply Damien, the man who had entered her life so unexpectedly. His eyes were soft, not full of urgency or promises, but something else. Something quieter, more profound. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he handed her the small paper bag, its warmth seeping through the thin parchment. "Homemade bread," he said. a soft smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't come to change your life," he continued, his voice low but steady. "I just want to be part of it." Lila took the bag from him, her fingers brushing against his for a moment longer than necessary. She could feel her heart beating faster, the sudden rush of warmth inside her chest that had nothing to do with the bread. His words settled over her like a quiet melody, and for the first time in months, she felt her fears ease, even if only for a moment. She looked up at him, meeting his gaze for the first time in a long while. In his eyes, she saw the same vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide within herself. He wasn't a man who had it all figured out, despite the wealth, the name, the success. Beneath all of it, he was just a man, like her, afraid of losing the very thing he had longed for but never thought he'd find. Lila hesitated, not sure what to say. What words could encapsulate everything she had been feeling? The uncertainty, the hope, the fear? Instead, she simply smiled, a gentle expression that was soft but filled with something deeper. Her smile, unspoken, said what she had been unable to voice before. In the months that followed, their connection grew, but it was not a whirlwind. It was not the kind of love that was loud, or full of spectacle, or placed under the glaring spotlight of public scrutiny. Instead, it was the quiet kind. The kind that built slowly, piece by piece, like a bridge being constructed between two hearts. They didn't need media attention, didn't need extravagant gestures. What mattered were the little things. The morning coffee shared on her porch, the quiet evenings spent watching the sunset, the way his daughters called her Aunt Lila, with the same innocence they reserved for their favorite fairy tales. She taught them how to braid flowers, and they taught her how to laugh a little louder, a little freer. Damien, too, found solace in the simplicity of their moments together. He helped her fix broken fences, and she found peace in the way his large hands, though accustomed to boardrooms and business deals, could delicately handle the smallest things, like an old wooden chair in need of repair or a bouquet of wildflowers. There were no grand declarations, no rushing to the altar. There was only trust, built quietly in the space between them. He didn't try to rush her. He didn't demand promises. He simply was, and in his being, Lila found a safe place to let go of her fears and just be. 2. A year later, under the same riverside tree where their journey had begun, they gathered with only a few loved ones, his daughters, still young and full of life, their smiles wide and free. There, in the soft glow of the setting sun, they said their vows. There was no grand ceremony, no flowers or fireworks. Just the quiet promise of love, the kind that needed no adornment. The kind that had been built on truth, patience, and understanding. "I don't need grandeur," Lila whispered, her hand in Damien's, as she looked out over the river that had carried them to this moment. "I only need this." And for the first time, she truly understood what it meant to find love, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet moments that spoke louder than any words ever could. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with others who might enjoy it too. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the journey of Lila and Damien, from their unexpected meeting to the quiet love they built together. What did you think of how it all ended? Was it the kind of love story you were hoping for? Feel free to drop a comment below and rate the story on a scale of 1 to 10. We want to know what you loved most and what you think could have been different. And if you're watching from somewhere interesting, let us know your location in the comments. We're curious to see where all our viewers are tuning in from. Thanks for watching, and we hope to bring you more stories like this one soon.